Well, sorry I can't be with you today. I look forward to seeing y'all next week, but hope you're all doing well. And so we will look forward to getting back together again when I'm back in the office next week. So let's just kind of jump in and get started. I thought we would look today at a passage of scripture from the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew 21. Now keep in mind, this passage that I'm going to read is a conversation between Jesus and the chief priests and the elders of the temple. So here we have Jesus is talking to some very important religious leaders. So let's listen to what he has to say to them. And so we start with Matthew 21, verse 28. Jesus says, "So what do you think? A man had 2 sons, and he went to the first, and he said, 'Son, go and work in the vineyard today.' And his son answered and said, 'I will not.' But afterward he changed his mind, and he went. And the man went to his other son and said the same thing, and that son answered, 'I go, sir,' but he did not go. Which of the 2 did the will of the Father?" And those chief priests and elders of the temple said, "The first one." And Jesus said to them, now remember, these are high-ranking religious leaders, and listen to what he said. "Truly I say to you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes go into the kingdom of God before you do. For John the Baptist came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him, but the tax collectors and the prostitutes believed him. But even when you saw it, you did not afterward change your minds and believe him." Ouch. So let's see what kind of lesson we can get out of this. I think we can find there are several, but one of them we want to look at today is the lesson about good intentions. Here's something you might find interesting. Have any of you ever had an overdue library book? Well, there are some people who really had an overdue book. In the Guinness Book of Records in 1995, there was a record for an unreturned and overdue library book. It was set when a book published in 1609 was borrowed from the Sidney Sussex College of Cambridge University by Colonel Robert Walpole. He borrowed that book from the library. He checked it out in 1667, and that book was found by Professor John Plum in a library at Houghton Hall, Norfolk, Great Britain, and returned in 1955. Checked out in 1667, returned in 1955. That was 288 years later. Well, the library was so excited to get it, they didn't charge any fine for it. Well, the most overdue book in the United States was a book on febrile diseases by Dr. J. Curry. It was checked, it was checked out in 1823 from the University of Cincinnati Medical Library, and it was returned on December 7th, 1968 by the borrower's great-grandson, Richard Dodd. Now, the calculated fine for a book that was 145 years overdue was $2,264. But the library waived the fine, and everybody was greatly relieved. Now, I'm sure that these people who checked out those books had every good intention of returning those books to the libraries. But it just didn't happen. The good intentions didn't result in the right actions. So what about in our story today? Father had 2 sons, went to the first, said, "Go and work in my vineyard today, my son." And the boy said, "Sure, I'll do it." But he never went anywhere near the vineyard. Later, he approached his second son with the same request, but the second son said, "Nope, I won't do it." Afterward, he changed his mind and he went. And which of these 2, Jesus asked those religious leaders, which one of these 2 did what the Father wanted? Well, what do we see in these 2 sons? The first son had good intentions. Well, that ought to count for something, shouldn't it? He didn't rebel when his father asked him to work in the field. He didn't talk back to him. I'm sure he had good intentions. The story is told of an old Westerner who was talking with some tourists from the East. "There I was," he told them, "trapped in a narrow canyon with a grizzly bear 2 yards away behind a tree. The only way to hit him was to ricochet a bullet off the high canyon wall on my right. I'm a champion shot, you know. And so I gauged my windage, I calculated the length of the barrel and the rate of the twist. So I balanced this with the hardness of the bullet and the angle of the yaw that it would have after smacking out of shape against the wall. I judged my chances of nailing that bear about 80 to 20. A one-rail bank shot, a controlled ricochet. So I took aim and I fired. Well, the Westerner paused and he asked the old trapper, said, well, did you hit him? Nope, said the old man. I missed the danged wall. Well, he had good intentions of making that ricochet shot, but it's a shame good intentions aren't always enough. We'd all be millionaires if good intentions paid off. There was an example of someone with good intentions in Life magazine back in 1995. His name was Gould Levison. He was a photographer and an inventor. In the early days of photography, cameras were large and stationary and bulky, and they were slow and hardly conducive to shooting candid photographs or what Levison called instantaneous pictures. So he and his partner, George Bradford Brainerd, invented their own camera, which they patented in 1885 as the Brainerd-Levison hand camera. And they took that camera along with them to outings to the New Jersey shore, to Canadian forests, and most often to scenic spots near their homes in Brooklyn. The partnership ended with Brainerd's death in 1887 at the age of 41. But in that same year, Levison invented another camera. This was a camera that could take a series of pictures in rapid succession, and it was a real breakthrough. Unfortunately, though, the distractions of family concerns and other projects kept him from completing the paperwork to patent his invention. This delay cost him his shot at immortality and fame, because that was in 1887. In 1891, Thomas Edison also invented a camera that would take pictures in rapid succession. So it was Thomas Edison, not Levinson, who patented the motion picture camera. Gould Levison intended to do it. We can be sure of that, but there were other pressing matters, though, and he just never got around to it. Good intentions, and he missed his shot to be known as the inventor of motion pictures. Some unknown author put it this way: he was going to be all that a mortal should be tomorrow. No one would be better than he tomorrow. Each morning he stacked up the letters he'd write tomorrow. It was too bad indeed he was too busy to see Bill, but he promised to do it tomorrow. The greatest of workers this man would have been tomorrow. The world would have known him had he ever seen tomorrow. But the fact is, he died and faded from view, and all that was left when living was through was a mountain of things he intended to do tomorrow. Good intentions. Isn't it interesting how easy it is to put off doing the things we ought to do, and some of us even put off the things that we want to do? Ann Wells, in an article in the Los Angeles Times, told about the preparations for her sister's funeral. Her brother-in-law, her sister's husband, handed Anne a lovely box, and in that box was a gorgeous silk and lace nightgown. It had never been worn. In fact, it had never been taken out of the box. The brother-in-law explained to Anne that her sister had bought the nightgown many years ago and was saving it for a special occasion. But that special occasion never seemed to come, so this exquisite gown had gone unused. And now Anne's sister was dead, and she would never have the opportunity to wear it. So the brother-in-law admonished Anne to never save anything for a special occasion, because everything should be a special occasion. And Anne took his words to heart, and she says this in her article: "I'm not saving anything. We use our good china and our good crystal for every special event, such as losing a pound, getting the sink unstopped, the first camellia. And every morning when I open my eyes, I tell myself that it is special." And that's a good cure for unrealized intentions. Now, Dale Carnegie said that one of the most tragic characteristics of human nature is that all of us tend to put off living. We're dreaming of some magical rose garden over the horizon instead of enjoying the roses that are blooming right outside our windows today. Good intentions. Now, we don't know why the first son never got around to doing his chores. procrastination, something more appealing came along? We don't know. But we do know it's very much a part of human nature to make commitments that we do not keep, to make promises that go unfulfilled, to leave behind a mountain of good intentions. The Center for Creative Leadership in Greensboro, North Carolina, released a study of 21 high-potential executives who were terminated or forced to retire early from their companies. The one universal character flaw which always led to downfall was not doing something that was promised. Motivational speaker Cavett Robert learned from an English professor long ago that character is the ability to carry out a resolution long after the mood in which it was made has left you. Sometimes we make these promises, we make these resolutions, and we feel really good about it, but then life goes on and we get excited about other things, and so the mood is gone. So character is that ability to carry out a resolution or a promise long after the mood in which it was made has left you. The first son had good intentions, but then he got out of the mood. He never made it to the vineyard. But the second son did work in the vineyard. That's really surprising because after all, he played the rebel to start with. No, I'm not going to work in the vineyards, what he told his dad. Maybe he had friends coming over, or maybe we're going to go to the mall, or working in the vineyard is such a drag. Why are you always picking on me and asking me to do this stuff? Maybe he said something like that, but then a strange thing happened. He changed his mind. He changed his mind and went obediently and did the work that his father asked him to do in the first place. Dr. Robert Coles tells a heartbreaking story about a young lady he met in his years as a medical intern. He was on the hospital pediatric service working with children who had leukemia. Now, this was back in the day when there were no drugs that saved such dangerously endangered lives. The only treatment they could do is to give blood and more blood and more blood to offer those boys and girls in hopes that would buy enough time for them to ward off the leukemia. In that regard, he recalled the first child that he had to transfuse, a 9-year-old girl who had more than an inkling that she would never celebrate another birthday. When he had gotten her latest pint of blood suitably going in her right leg, her arms were no longer useful in that respect because her veins had been overused, so he had to do it in her leg. She gave him a smile and she asked him what seems like a simple question: "How many more bottles will you be giving me?" Well, quickly, Dr. Cole said he didn't know. He was thinking she was asking about in that particular treatment that day, how many bottles was he going to use. But she had a much broader, larger perspective. She said, I mean, before I die. Of course, he hastened to reassure her, but she had scant patience with his platitudes. When they'd been uttered, she countered with this: I'll never get to be a 10-year-old, but I hope before this leukemia wins, I can win. Well, needless to say, Dr. Coles wondered what she had in mind. What was she talking about? He asked her which victories did she have in mind. "I'd like to be good," she said, "so people would say she was a good girl." And she went on and confessed to Dr. Coles that before her illness, she would be, in her words, she had been a hellion. "Who in the world told you that?" he wondered aloud. And she told him, said, "My mom and my dad, both of them." And why would they say such a thing? And she was ready with a list of things that she used to do. And it made him wonder whether she was exaggerating wildly or whether she was confused in her mind as she was struggling with this illness. But the next day when her dad and mother came in, they confirmed that her description was pretty much on target. And her mother added this, a remark that was so meaningful and so pointed that Dr. Coles recalled it virtually word for word even 30 years later. The mother said, "She tells us she wants to prove herself a really good person before she dies, and she asks us for help in becoming so." And then the mother added this surprising comment: "We live a lifetime trying to find out how to live, and this is her last chance to do that for herself." We live a lifetime trying to find out how to live. Interesting, this young 9-year-old girl, knew that she might not have tomorrow. If she was going to turn around her life, it had to be now. There's a question we should ask ourselves. If we knew we only had a very, very short time to live, what changes would we make in our lives? Are there promises that we have made that we haven't kept yet? Are there good intentions that we've had that we haven't carried out yet? The sad truth of life is that we don't have much time, especially when compared to eternity. There's not much time. If you and I are going to be all that God has called us to be in this lifetime, we need to begin now, today. If we're going to do the things God has called us to do, we need to do them now. A father had 2 sons. He went to the first and said, "Go and work in my vineyard today, my son." And he said, "All right, sir." But he never went near the vineyard. Then the father approached the second son with the same request, but the second son said, "I won't." Afterward, he changed his mind and he went. And so which of these 2, Jesus asked, did what the father wanted? And our answer would be the same as that of the chief priest and the elders so long ago as the second son. The great Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once told a story of a flock of geese that was starting to head south to escape the blast of the wintry winds. And the first night of their flight, they landed in a farmer's yard and they filled themselves with the corn that they could find in abundance there. Well, the next morning they all flew on, continuing their journey south. All that is except one goose. "The corn is good," this big goose said, "so I think I'll stay and enjoy it another day." Well, the next morning he decided to wait still another day and another after that because that corn was really good and he didn't want to give it up. So pretty soon he had developed a habit. Every day he would get up and say, tomorrow I'll fly south. And then came that inevitable day when the winds of winter came in where that goose was, at that farmer's yard. And the winds were so severe that waiting longer would mean death in the frozen wastes. So that goose that had been dawdling for so long so he could enjoy all that good corn stretched his wings and waddled across the barnyard, picking up speed as he went. But unfortunately, he was too fat to fly. He had waited too long. So the opportunity to fly south for the winter had passed. Someone put it this way: Jesus said, "Follow me." But we delay while trying to understand, what does that mean? What's the intention of that? Jesus said, "Follow me." But we have doubts about whether we should do that. If I follow Jesus, I may not be popular. People might think I'm strange. People might call me names. Jesus said, "Follow me." But we think, I need to consider that another time. Right now, it's not really convenient to think about something that important. Jesus said, "Follow me." But we want to wait for more information. Jesus said, "Follow me." But we wonder, will I have enough time? That might require a lot of time, and I don't know if I have that much time right now, so maybe I need to put that off till another time. But then a voice from heaven was heard, "For Jesus' sake and for your own, just follow him." It's a simple 2-word invitation, but too often we make it so complicated and we just smother it with good intentions. A father had 2 sons, and we have the same choice to make as those 2 sons. When we hear the call of Jesus to follow him, to do what he wants us to do, we've got the same choice that those 2 sons of the owner of the vineyard had. We can easily say, "Sure, I'll follow him," but then never go beyond good intentions. Or we can ultimately fulfill the Lord's will by following him. There's an old song, I don't know if y'all know it. It's an old song that the words in it, the 3rd verse of it, down in the valley or upon the mountain steep, close behind my Savior, would my soul ever keep. He will lead me safely in the path that he has trod, up to where they gather on the hills of God. And then the chorus to it, the refrain, follow, follow, I would follow Jesus. Anywhere, everywhere, I would follow on. Follow, I would follow Jesus. Everywhere he leads me, I would follow on. And that's exactly what Jesus wants us to do. When he says, come and follow me, he's inviting us onto a journey, a lifetime of obedience and following him and taking our steps right along with him. There's an old book by Charlie Shedd, I believe it is, In His Steps. He just wants us to follow in his steps. Ask ourselves the questions, what would Jesus have me to do? And then follow through on the answer that he gives to us. Everywhere he leads me, I would follow on. May that be our promise to God, and may God bless you today. See you next week. Bye-bye.